Welcome. Thanks for being here. I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. I'm very glad to have each of you here for Moral Mondays Iowa. And Moral Mondays really is a collaborative effort of a lot of organizations. They're all at the bottom of the sheet if you want to know who's involved. If you're part of an organization that wants to be part of Moral Mondays, it's a really, really hard test that you have to take. No, really. You just email me and say, we want to be part of it. And it is really about bringing the progressive voice to the Capitol and learning about the issues, but then also taking action on those issues. So we are very pleased to having I can't speak, Representative Beth Wessel-Christel from Ames, as well as Jamie Burch-Elliott, who is the Public Affairs Manager for Planned Parenthood of the Heartland and Planned Parenthood Voters of Iowa. And we're going to talk about increasing access to birth control. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamie.
All right, thanks, Connie. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. So we've been talking about birth control basically since the 2017 legislative session when Planned Parenthood was defunded, right? And so, before that happened, Iowa was considered a birth control desert. And so, what you see there is that investigative reporting has showed that beyond defunding Planned Parenthood and Planned Parenthood having to close for mainly rural health centers, is that across the state, it isn't overly easy to get birth control as a woman of reproductive age. We have a large part of our state is covered by religious affiliated hospitals, primarily Catholic hospitals, and the Des Moines Register did some digging and showed that you cannot go to those hospitals and get birth control for prevention of pregnancy. It has to be prescribed as hormone therapy. And in 2019, over 50 years after birth control has been very normal, it's troubling. And so, and then we see things like health centers and family planning clinics facing the same problems that other rural healthcare providers and hospitals are facing with insurance, with Medicaid reimbursements, with insurance reimbursements. Providing family planning care, birth control, is not a lucrative business. It's very expensive. And it's just a specialty kind of care that is in very high demand, but doctors and providers aren't always reimbursed for the full cost of care. And so having a family planning clinic is expensive. So we saw Grinnell and Marshalltown, not affiliated with Planned Parenthood or an abortion provider, have to shut their doors. Where I grew up in Northeast Iowa near Decorah, they had to close their family planning clinic a few years ago just because it was too expensive to run. And so it is not easy to access family planning care. Now, of course, you can go to any doctor and access birth control. However, people should be able to choose where they go to receive their family planning, their birth control health care. And you look at these things compounded with, some religious affiliated healthcare providers that won't provide birth control, and you see large swaths of our state where it's just nearly impossible to access basic birth control. And I think, in this day and age, in 2019, women should be able to access birth control to prevent pregnancy. I don't think that should be a controversial topic anymore. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, I pulled this from a memo that they wrote on birth control access, because they say this is a nationwide problem. Iowa is just a snapshot of a larger problem across our country. They said the benefits of contraception has been named one of the 10 great public health achievements of the 20th century, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And it's widely recognized to improve health and well-being. It's reduced global maternal mortality. It's improved health benefits of pregnancy spacing for maternal and child health. It has increased female engagement in the workforce, and economic self-sufficiency. And 99% of U.S. women who have been sexually active report having used some form of contraception. And 87.5% report use of highly effective reversible methods, which are, the methods that we primarily talk about. And that universal healthcare coverage of contraceptives is cost effective and reduces unintended pregnancy and abortion rates. And so, and additionally, we're getting real healthcare here. Non-contraceptive benefits include decreased bleeding and pain with menstrual periods and reduced risk of gynecologic disorders, including a decreased risk of endometrial and ovarian cancer. And so I wanted to share that with you to say that birth control is widely thought of and widely known to be safe. I think a lot of times in this debate about birth control, we hear about how women should not have the ability to choose their own, go to the pharmacist and, choose their own birth control, and talk. We hear a lot of fear mongering related to something that is widely considered safe and effective. You think about the health risks of taking birth control versus the health risks of carrying a pregnancy to term, and they are vastly different. Compared to a pregnancy, birth control is incredibly safe. And so, there's some other misinformation that I want to address here. OBGYN standards of care largely show that patients don't need to see a doctor to get birth control. I think that we should be able to trust women to make their own healthcare decisions. And typically we say that related to abortion, but let's say that about birth control as well. Let's allow women to truly claim the ability to plan their families. And so, there is I sense some fear in removing doctors from the equation, and I think we have to ask ourselves, where is that fear coming from? Is it just because it's different, right? Is it just because, removing that doctor, which we have found is not necessary? What's the big problem there? If it's safe, then, why? Complications while taking birth control are very rare, and the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, ACOG as it's sometimes known, they suggest that birth control be over the counter, meaning you don't even consult with a pharmacist, is that your insurance pays for it, but you just walk into a pharmacy, pick your birth control up off the shelf, your insurance covers it, and you move on. And they say that the risks of pregnancy far outweigh the risks of birth control. And don't get me wrong, there are health risks to taking birth control. There are health risks for taking any medication. And as a reminder, birth control is a medication, just like anything else. And so, I think we have to think about where our questions in this come from. Because largely access to birth control should not be overly controversial. And so, it's interesting to see a Republican-controlled legislature that, on one hand, defunds Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers, where you have, where you drastically limit access to birth control. And then we have in this legislative session, Governor Reynolds introducing a bill to increase access to birth control. Don't get me wrong, I'm very excited about this bill. We need to increase access to birth control in this state. We need to do whatever we can to support women and people seeking birth control as much as possible. I want to add one more layer here that makes the need for this bill or make the need for the bills that we'll discuss in a moment even more necessary, is that the loss of Title X, which is the nation's only family planning, birth control. It's the only federally funded birth control program in the country. It is going to go away for abortion providers very soon. So you'll hear about this. Sometimes it's called the domestic gag rule. Sometimes it's just called Title X, which is an X, the Roman numeral X, instead of the number 10. And it's how, about 30 plus years ago, family planning clinics became a concept across the country. The idea was that we would, as a country, reduce cost and reduce Medicaid births by providing birth control for free or for low cost. And it is wildly successful. So what we see here with the Trump administration is going in and changing the rules. So they haven't been able to defund Planned Parenthood using the legislative process at the federal level. So what they did was they just rewrote the rules. And what these rules do are make it impossible for abortion providers to provide Title X. They have financial and physical separation requirements that are completely unfeasible. They have put in place a gag rule on doctors. So if a woman goes to a Title X provider and says, you know, I would like information on abortion, the doctor is not able to tell that patient that abortion is even an option. That doctor is not allowed to tell the patient where to go to have an abortion. And this is the government interfering directly in private medical decisions and telling doctors the type of care that or the type of information that they can give their patients, and that is a dangerous precedent to set in this country. And the final thing is that it makes it so that doctors no longer have to share all of the information about birth control related to this program. So in order to participate in this program previously, you had to share information. If your patient asked where to get an abortion, you had to tell them. And you also had to give them information on all FDA approved methods of birth control. And that will no longer be the case. So if a provider provides one type of birth control or gives information on one type of FDA-approved birth control, then they can participate in the program, which is also dangerous because a great thing about birth control is that there are a lot of different methods, and women generally can pick and choose what works for them. Not everything works for everybody, just the same way taking any medication might not work for you and you switch to something different, right? So there are forms that are long-acting, there are forms that are more short-term, and really, it takes away the power of doctors and patients to make those decisions. So, this rule has been finalized. It will go into effect in little under 60 days. There are lawsuits, many, many lawsuits in place, so I imagine it will get tied up in the courts, but by no means can we count on the courts to save us from this. I think we're looking at a future where the nation's largest family planning program is drastically cut. And in Iowa, we know exactly what's going to happen, right? We have now a state family planning program that has failed. We saw a 50% drop in patients receiving or accessing this program, and we saw a 70% decrease in services provided. So half of the people that used to participate in the program no longer do, and nearly, 3/4 of the people participating in the program are accessing the same level of services. What we see is generally, patients are still walking into our doors and they're just choosing to pay out of pocket. Or what's happening even more is that people are just going without birth control. So we do have this Band-Aid to fix this program and this problem. So I think Representative Wetzel-Kroschel is going to fill us in on what this proposed legislation does.
Sure. And thanks for being here. This bill certainly is a good start.
Yes.
It goes in the right direction, but it does not solve many of the problems that Jamie just told us about, because, even I found the subcommittee kind of entertaining. Somebody else must have been there, because there were, I'm all for access to birth control, and I agree that we need to leave a lot of these decisions up to women and families on how they access it, and it is so much safer than a pregnancy, because pregnancies can be quite dangerous. So this is good, but there are some restrictions. So you have to be 18 years old or older in order to get your birth control at a pharmacy. You have to be healthy, and that means you have to self-assess that you're healthy, and there's a form that you'll fill out and then discuss with your pharmacist. And then, because of Jamie's work, they've added the requirement that you'll have a blood pressure screen at the pharmacist, which most pharmacists do. I mean, not for every drug, but they have them there. So those will be really good. One of my concerns when we went into this was that it was going to shift the cost to families and to women who couldn't afford it, but this bill does cover that. So there is an insurance mandate. It does require pharmacists to go through additional training, although I understand that pharmacists who are currently in school are already getting that training. This is something that is happening in 7 other states, and so we have 7 other states to look to when we go to the point of writing rules for this and how much and what kind of education pharmacists are going to need. Some of the things that I thought were interesting, because I think we've been hollering for quite a long time that we need to have these clinics open. We do miss Planned Parenthood and the 4 clinics that were open, because not only do we have a problem with birth control, but there's also the problem with cancer screenings, where a lot of people were getting their cancer screenings from Planned Parenthood, STD screenings and treatment. And in particular, I'm concerned about teen pregnancies, because you have to be 18 years old in order to access this form. And so we've got some problems. It does not give the best kinds of birth controls, the ones that have, we've seen the best results with recently, which were the long-term reversible methods. What you can get there from this bill would be birth control pills that you have to take every day, at the same time every day, the ring and the patch. I have a story to tell you about a mother who was telling me this story about her daughter who's in her 20s, sexually active, but disabled, and she sees everything black and white. Everything's black and white, and she was told to take her birth control pills every single day at exactly the same time. So she was doing it every day at 9 o'clock in the morning. But one day she had a doctor's appointment that was going to be over that 9 o'clock in the morning, and in black and white, she couldn't take it at 9 o'clock. So she said, well, I just won't take it today. So birth control pills don't work for everybody. And if they don't truly understand that an hour difference might be okay. As a matter of fact, is okay and needs to happen. So if you can't take a pill every day, it's not a form that's probably great for you, although the patch and the ring are also available. They do require that you can only have the birth control pill for 24 months, for 2 years, before you have to see a physician. And another thing that was added to the bill was an ID. You have to show an ID to make sure you are who you say you are, and that would be to protect from human traffickers trying to keep young women from getting pregnant as they traffic them. So it's kind of sad that we have to do that, but we do. They estimate that it'll be about 30 minutes with the pharmacist, and although there is an insurance mandate with it, it does not cover the time with the pharmacist. And so whether pharmacists will choose to do this, they don't have to or not. We don't know. There are some states where it is allowed, and pharmacists are not using it to the extent that we would hope they would, because it does provide access. And if you think about it, if we get that population with their birth control, we might be able to catch up with the rest of the populations, the women who aren't healthy and the women who need longer-term reversible methods or that require a medical procedure. Or the teenagers. So if you get those, a certain portion of the population getting their birth control through the pharmacy, it could ease up some time of medical providers to do that. That would be my hope. So I think that's all I have to say.
And I think one of my favorite parts of this bill is that it also requires insurance to cover a year's supply of birth control, even if you don't go to the pharmacy. So if you have a current prescription, or if you go to your doctor to get your birth control prescription, you can walk out of the pharmacy with a year's supply of that method, which is a huge convenience. I think for those of us that have been on birth control understand, the week that you have to pick up your birth control pills or whatever that method, you are constantly calculating how soon you can go pick that up, right? Because, and so if you can just have a year's supply just sitting in your medicine cabinet, what a huge relief that will be for Iowa women. So I think that's really great. And this also requires, you know, there were some concerns about waste. So, you know, getting a year's supply of birth control and then, you know, maybe that method doesn't work for you, or it causes side effects that you don't like. What they have decided to do instead is first you get an initial 3 months, and if that goes well, then the doctor can, or the pharmacist rather, can then give you a year's supply. So I think that year's supply is a really key piece as well.
I think it's good for rural Iowans.
It's
also,
very
where
good.
Their pharmacies are harder and harder to come by.
Right. So, and I mean, what Representative Wessel-Krishel pointed out was that this will, you know, this will not require, you know, those regular STI or STD screenings that happen when you go in for an annual exam. And it also won't, you know, same with those cancer screenings. Having said that, the standard of care is on average 2 years, right? So if there's a contraindication that would require you to see a doctor every year or even less, then the pharmacist doesn't have to give you a year's supply. You know, this just gives them the option, and then, you know, they can require that you go see a doctor. So this doesn't mean that people are going to go largely without medical care, but I do think it's something that we need to keep in the back of our minds, that it is certainly going to, it's not going to solve our STI and STD problem, which is, they are at epidemic levels in some regions of our state. So, yeah.
So we'll open it up for questions, so just let us know if you have one.
I wonder if, in the pharmacies, if they would, to reduce the time the actual registered pharmacist has to spend with the person, if, like, volunteers could be trained to do the questioning and that. I know, I used to work for Planned Parenthood, and we used volunteers who were very well trained to do just that. Or, you know, like, I'm a retired nurse, so, you know, that would be an easy way for me to slide into volunteer work.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's not in the bill, but I
Well,
don't know I don't know if it works in other states or not, or how they do that. Yeah.
So go ahead, they couldn't hear the question.
The question was, is there so that pharmacists don't have to spend, you know, up to 30 minutes with a patient, is there an opportunity for volunteers to help? And that is not in the bill. I'm not sure if that's a solution. Certainly, thanks for bringing it up. You know, and I think in my experiences going to get birth control at a healthcare facility, I've never spent 30 minutes with the doctor, to be honest. So I think 30 minutes is probably an exaggeration. We're talking, if it's 15 minutes, I would say that is a long time. I have never spent more than 15 minutes with my OBGYN on a birth control visit.
Carl?
Yeah, what happens if you have a pharmacist whose religion forbids birth control?
They're already able to
Can you repeat
refuse.
the question for
Oh, sorry, repeating the question. So the question is, what if a pharmacist is opposed to giving out birth control for religious reasons? They can already refuse to provide birth control for religious reasons. Doctors can refuse to provide birth control for religious reasons, and they do. That's part of the reason why we need to expand access to birth control in Iowa.
Rick?
Yeah, a quick two-part question. The governor has endorsed this, correct?
This is her bill.
This is her bill, and so, the second part of the question is there major opposition? And if so, what is the opposition?
So at subcommittee, the groups that were opposed to abortion were opposed to this bill. So Concerned Women for America, the Family Leader, Right to Life groups, Catholic Conference were all opposed to this bill. They were some of the people who brought up the fact that it doesn't take care of the STD problem. But so there's that segment are opposed to it because they consider birth control pills to be I can never say it, abortifacient. Abortifacient. So they don't want access at all. Now, when it went to committee, there were only 2 votes against it, which I thought was pretty good. It has not come to the floor yet. I haven't seen it I haven't seen a calendar for tomorrow yet, but it needs to pass here pretty quick in order to get through the next funnel. So there's some objections in the other caucus. There are some objections, I think milder objections in terms of scope of practice, expanding the scope of practice for pharmacists and not providing it and taking it away from physicians. I think that Jamie's made some really good points on that we need to expand access, and it is not certainly Sudafed is probably bad if you take too much of it. It is behind the counter, but there are lots of over-the-counter drugs that are not safe if you misuse them in particular, and that you may have to go to see a doctor if you have a bad reaction to them. And I think we're looking at this in those terms. So there's some, I would call those more milder objections that I think we can overcome.
And if I can just pipe in here, according to medical professionals, birth control is not an abortifacient. Birth control prevents pregnancy. Birth control is not an abortion, according to medical professionals and scientists. Thank you.
Other questions that you might have?
I mean, don't get me wrong, we can keep talking. Yeah. Oh, that's right.
Do you know what? It's got a new number. And
I got it. I was
okay,
prepared
so
for this.
214, House Study Bill 214, but it's come out of committee, so it's got a number.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
House File 727.
And
Did I
Senate,
get-
Yoo-hoo.
and Senate File what?
348.
348. And I also want to say, like, I'm not here to talk bad about Catholic healthcare systems. They do provide excellent health care, and in most scenarios, not related to family planning, certainly, but this is just the reality of our healthcare system, is that we have entire healthcare systems that can deny people access to a very basic, very common, very safe medicine. So based on personal belief. And so that is concerning to me, and it is part of the reason why we have problems with access to birth control. So is that women have to go in and lie to their doctor about why they want birth control. They have to say, I'm having this problem and I think birth control will help me. They can't just go in and say, I'm here to prevent pregnancy. And I think in this day and age that is very problematic.
Any other questions?
Can I ask you
Yep.
So there are at least 2 pharmacists that are legislators. One is John Fulton, right? The other, I think, is a Republican from Eastern Iowa. Do we have support from both of them?
Yes. The question was, we have 2 pharmacists that are legislators, John Forbes in the Senate and Senator Green in the Senate. Representative John Forbes and Senator Green, yes. And they do support the bill.
John was on committee and voted it out of committee, so
Yes.
he's voted for it already.
Yes.
That was my question. Have the pharmacists signed on for it, or who's opposed to it? Who's not? Pharmacists, they assume they have lobbyists, and
They do have
They
a
support it,
lobbyist,
yeah.
and they didn't, the lobbyist declarations are always a little strange, but I was on River to River.
Hey.
Sorry, oops. No offense to anybody that I'm sitting next to, but I was on River to River with a representative from the lobbyist and Representative Shannon Lundgren about this issue, and the lobbyist group, or the pharmacist group, was very supportive of it and was very favorable about adding this to the group. I think they are undecided on actual lobbyists, so.
Medical associations.
The other medical associations, I don't, last I saw there wasn't, I haven't looked recently, but I think, Monica Kurth has it open right here and she can tell us who's,
Yeah, I'm looking for the, certainly the, pharmacy is undecided. Osteopathic medical is undecided. Academy of Family Physicians, undecided.
Yeah.
Mostly, is there anybody against it?
oh yeah,
Just the religious people.
Iowa Catholic Conference, Concerned Women of America.
all those people.
Iowa Faith and Freedom, yeah, that's it.
And the undecided, that's not uncommon.
Right,
for those
that's
kind
what
of-
I mean, that's kind of weird.
First of all, they make decisions often in their associations based on their membership's decision-making, and they have people on both sides of the issue. So a lot of times they'll be undecided just because of that. That's not an uncommon thing.
And the nurse practitioners groups are all for it.
Oh, okay.
Kind of like the sisters in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Yes.
If a pharmacist or provider says, no, I don't believe in this process, are they obligated to give you places, referrals where you could go?
The question was if pharmacists or doctors refuse to provide these services, do they have to tell you where you can go? And I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that question.
I thought there was a lawsuit in California, a number of years ago, where a religious hospital said, no, you can't do this particular thing here. The person sued, and I thought the law was changed there.
Well, it may be different in different states.
California,
too.
right, I
Yeah.
don't know anything
Well, I
that would
just-
require
yeah.
them.
Barb, did you have a question?
If we can't get local positions, can you somehow get the national standing and percentage that are for it, really emphasize that? I didn't realize that there was that,
Yes, so the question is if we can't get support from these medical groups at the state level, can we get it from the national level? And I think you can typically go to their, it's very easy to find for the OBGYN groups, it's very easy to find that they are in support of taking this a step further and just having over-the-counter birth control. So, I think with OBGYNs, that's clear. I think a lot of other medical associations have things like policies like this just posted openly on their website. So maybe, but yeah, I am also, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a multi-year fight. Like I would imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if this stalled at some point and then we start the conversation again next year for this biennium. It's a very new, so what Representative Anderson just said, it's a very new idea. And this is a very new concept, and so if people need some time.
For us.
Yes, is it for Iowa, right? There are other states in the District
Right.
of Columbia, this is available. And there are varying levels of access from pharmacists on birth control, but.
and birth controls or pills have changed a lot from the 60s when I was coming of age, and they, were really strong, and we did have problems. They're
Yeah.
so much different now than different.
The comment was that birth control pills have changed a lot over the years, and that is true. There are varying levels of hormones. There are different types of hormones. We can turn this into a sex ed class really quickly, but I won't do that to you. I'm happy to answer those types of questions after. I know not everyone's comfortable, not as comfortable as me and Beth talking about birth control just so openly. So, but
Anytime.
and I know, anytime. So, but yes, it has changed a lot in the 50 years that it's been, over 50 years that it's been available. So, it's largely now considered safe. And, yeah. Go ahead.
So is there, do the pharmacists then encourage the women to go to a doctor at some point in the 2-year period?
They have to.
To be, okay, they have to.
Within
To be tested for the STDs and the cervical cancer and
Yes.
the other things that we can find out from an exam.
Yeah.
And they have to.
Yes, so I have it right here. So the question is, do the patients have to go to a doctor within those 2 years? And yes, it requires a doctor's visit every 27 months. So, and then, so they have to, and then they also provide written info on the importance of seeing a primary care practitioner or a women's health care practitioner to obtain recommended tests and screenings, but it does require it after 27 months. And then the patient will also receive information on the effective and availability of long-acting reversible contraceptives as an alternative to self-administered contraceptives. So what that means is that they receive information on things like IUDs, implants, and learn that, you know, those might be a more effective method for those patients instead of a birth control pill or a patch or a ring. Yeah. And they also do talk to the patient. They must talk to the patient about the risk of contracting sexually transmitted infections and diseases. So there is a conversation there between the pharmacist and the patient.
Yeah, clearly, this does nothing for teen pregnancies. Was there a discussion about parental permission or any of these issues?
I think Planned Parenthood brought that up at the subcommittee. I don't think it's been brought up since. They took a lot of the good stuff that came up on subcommittee, and
Most
put
of
it
it.
into the bill, but that was one that they did not.
Yeah.
And was it you that recommended that a parent go with a teen child to give permission? And that was a recommendation, makes all the sense in the world, but it was not accepted.
Teens, however, can still go to any other Title X facility. So typically standalone family planning clinics do offer our Title X providers, or they can go to a Planned Parenthood and receive information about contraceptives and get an annual exam, their first cancer screening, STI and STD tests. So, you know, a Title X clinic is required to offer confidential services to teens.
Even after 60 days?
After this
After
rule.
the
Oh, yes, they, as long as, yeah, if it's not a Planned Parenthood, they can still come to Planned Parenthood and we will provide them with health care. I want to say with this, on this Title X rule, Planned Parenthood stores are staying open. There will be no changes to health centers. I mean, where do you go from here? It's very bare bones at this point. But in this Title X, it will be another cut of $1 million and another loss of just under 14,000 patients again. So it was 14,000 patients in the last time and $3 million, another $1 million and about the same amount of patients. And those are patients over a 3-year span, because when you access birth control, you don't need to, sometimes, you know, if you have an IUD and everything's going well, we don't see you again for another 3 years. So, but yeah.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to Jamie and Beth. And we hope to see you again next week. Thank you.